Nick, how many games do you reckon you just pick up the resources and throw them down on the table and see what happens?
There's that one game, Dungeon Drop, that's kind of like that.
Okay, but there should probably be more games that do that, right?
Yeah.
These are things we want to see more of in games.
What's up, everybody? My name is Nick.
I'm Mike.
We are the Brothers Murph, and where we talk about mechanics that we want to see more in games. We did recently, we've done like themes we want to see more in games, things like that. We're talking about mechanisms. These could be like big mechanisms, like this is a whole genre of games, or it could maybe like a small part of a game. Like, man, I wish someone else did this because it's really, really cool. So these are gonna be the top 10 mechanisms that we want to see in games, eh?
Mm-hmm. So number 10 is slide puzzles, things that incorporate moving things and sliding them around and kind of the spatial elements that come with that. One game that we think of that has slide puzzles in our mind to it is Juicy Fruits. In Juicy Fruits, you have this small island that may open up hopefully for yourself, and you have different types of fruit you're trying to collect. And if you have like a little basket with limes on it, if you can slide it over, you're gonna slide it until it basically bumps into a barrier of some kind, whether that be the edge of the island, a building, or what have you. However many spaces you were able to successfully slide over, that's how many limes you collect. So you might get 3 limes or what have you, and that might open up another spot for somebody to drop down and get some bananas or whatever it might be that you need. I really love the idea of things needing to kind of slide, get out of the way for other things to slide down. It's like those slide things where you make the picture kind of appear by sliding stuff into the right spot. I think it's an interesting way to generate resources or create actions or something for yourself. And I'd love to see something like that that really adds that spatial puzzle into the middle of a larger game. So give me some more slide puzzles.
Our number 9 mechanic that we would like to see more is line manipulation games. I really like line manipulation games. We have Guillotine, we also have Beastie Bar, and these are games where you're gonna have some kind of line of usually cards, and you are trying to manipulate that line and get certain things in certain spots to benefit you in some way. Sometimes that could be like getting the right cards, like a guillotine. It's about a guillotine, it's the French Revolution. You have a big old line of nobles and they're shink, 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 getting all of their heads chopped off. And you, on your turn, whoever's at the front of the line is gonna get their head chopped off and you're gonna collect that noble. Kind of gruesome if you really think about it. But there are certain nobles that are worth more, certain that are worth less. Some can be negative points. And so you're manipulating the line, trying to get the most valuable nobles into your hand at the end of the game. There are also games like Parade where you are trying to not take cards. This is an Alice in Wonderland themed game where you are trying to not take any cards. Cards are bad, points are bad, you don't want any of them. And line manipulation games are just so much fun where you're trying to move stuff around. It's just a way to kind of mess with your opponents where you're all kind of working on the same board, working in the same area, but you're trying to make it look how you want it to look for you. And it's just a really fun mechanic that I think doesn't get used very often. And I think it's because a lot of line manipulation games are just that. That's the whole game. And maybe it's just people feel like they're kind of done it, maybe don't need any more, but I would love to see it be part of a bigger game. I don't know, I just really, really like line manipulation games and I wish there were more of them.
Something I'd really like to see is the idea of games that incorporate strategic resting. So the timing of when you kind of do your recover action, or in something like Shakespeare, after the round, any cards that you activated, you have to put all of them to rest except for one. So you can choose one that you can use the next round, but everything else that you used is unavailable for the very next round. So how do you decide what's gonna be kind of go to rest for a while, what's gonna be available, things like that, deciding kind of when to end a round and reset for yourself. I really think that's interesting to make that a really compelling choice. Not simply that I ran out of stuff, maybe something where I'm gonna do this a little bit earlier because if I do this, then with the cadence of the game, it allows me to kind of refresh all my actions and my resources and really hit it hard. So I think that's something that's really fascinating and fun. It's something where the rest action of something, or when you choose to stop and catch your breath, is a strategic choice as well. So I want to see more of that.
Number 7 is a mechanic. It's not really a mechanic, we're gonna call it delayed gratification. And what I mean by that is The longer you wait to do something, the longer you leave something there, the better it's going to be for you. This could be something like Tzolk'in, where you're putting your meeples down onto a big gear, and the longer you wait on that gear, the more powerful that is going to become. Something like Arc Nova does this, where you have your 5 action cards, but the longer you wait to do an action card, it's going to constantly be moving up in line, and it's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And a new game that does this that we absolutely love right now is Woodcraft. Woodcraft has a big old saw, because you're all wood people and stuff, big old the great saw. And there are actions on the saw, and on your turn, you can choose one of the actions, and you take the action, you kind of move it to the front of the line of stuff. And the longer things are left back, they start to get bonuses attached to them because the saw is constantly turning, and as it turns, it'll start to reveal bonuses. And things that are still back here are gonna have those bonuses attached to them. So there's all these kind of like delayed gratifications where you're like, ooh, if I wait, maybe this can get better. And then eventually you get to the point where you're like, I don't really need to do that action, but man, that's got a whole bunch of bonuses attached to it. Maybe I should do it. And so I really enjoy that kind of delayed gratification where the longer you wait to do something, the better it gets. I think it's really, really cool. And there are definitely some games that do this. And I feel like recently there's been more games that have been doing this, but I really, really like that mechanic because I think it makes really interesting choices. It strikes a nice balance between like patience and reward. Like, should you do it now and get this now because it'd be useful to get that worker back or whatever, or should you wait a little bit longer and get a bigger bonus? I just think it's really, really fun, and I wish it was in more games.
Something I want to see of more is in a worker placement game, something like Architects of the West Kingdom does, where there's kind of worker investment, where if you go to an action with 1 worker, you might get a wood. But if you go there a second time, now there's 2 workers there, you can get 2 wood and 3 wood and so on. And the more you kind of invest in an area, the stronger something becomes. Of course, in Architects of the West Kingdom, that also makes you a juicy target for people rounding you up and throwing you in jail for, I guess, loitering or whatever. But it's something that's really interesting, and I'd love to see more games kind of reward you for investing in a certain area. And then what do you do with whatever those resources are or whatever is produced for you? How do you then go use it? And how much do you invest in one area versus diversifying your efforts and kind of putting things all over the place and having more flexibility there? I think that's something that's really fun and interesting, and something like a Architects of the West Kingdom is interesting because most worker placement games come down to very limited space. And if someone goes to a spot, now it's blocked for everyone else. And I like that, hey, all are welcome here. And in fact, if you come here multiple times, you're gonna get better stuff. Now you don't just get bricks and things, you might get gold or whatnot. So I think that makes for a really fun, extra level and layer to think about. It's just like, what happens if I keep going back to this spot? How great can I make this for myself? That's worker investment. I would love to see more of that in different games because it just adds a nice little stitch to something that's pretty familiar, like worker placement.
Number 5 is a mechanic that shows up sometimes, but this is follow mechanics. What that means is that when someone does an action, everyone else or some people then get to follow that action, but they get to essentially do the same action, but usually a lesser version of this. This has been around for a while. Puerto Rico, I think, was the first main game that did this, but there are like Race for the Galaxy, the new Terraforming Mars, Ares Expedition does follow mechanics, Boone Lake does follow mechanics. So this is definitely something that is around. It's not like it's the rarest mechanic out there, but it is one that I think is so interesting because of the sole reason alone that it means the game has significantly less downtime. Downtime is one of the biggest enemies in board gaming because you're just sitting there bored, waiting for your turn to happen. But a follow mechanic means you're always getting to do stuff. You're always doing stuff, even on other people's turns. It's a lesser version, but hey, that's okay. And especially like in say Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition, it makes choosing what actions you want to do so interesting because you're like, man, I really want to do a production action, but I think that Mary is gonna do a production action. So I think maybe I can do this because I'll still get to do that because I think they're gonna do that. And so I think it makes such interesting choices and such interesting choices in prioritization and what do you wanna prioritize on your turn. And it also causes for less downtime. So I think follow mechanics are absolutely outstanding and I wish they were in more and more and more games because I absolutely love them.
Another thing I'd like to see more of is the tile drafting that happens in Quadropolis. And from what we understand, Meadow also does this, which makes me very excited. In Quadropolis, you are gonna have a kind of central grid of tiles that you're hoping to draft from. And the way that you choose what you can draft are using these little arrow, your architects, these little arrows that have numbers 1 through 4 or 5 if you're playing the advanced variant, and wherever you place it around this kind of grid of tiles, if I put it over here and it's a 4, I'm gonna count 1, 2, 3, 4 spots in from where that arrow is, and that's the tile I take. So there's kind of this tactical battle of, obviously if I put an arrow here, no one can place it on top of that, and you move this like little city planner around so no one can kind of go for the same row or column. There's a lot of intrigue and interest there in terms of how do I actually get to the right tile? And if it's over down here in the kind of lower spot, do I use a 1 and come in from the bottom, or do I use a 2 over here because it's 1, 2 spaces in? It just creates this interesting like spatial puzzle. And then of course with Quadropolis, the number that you use to draft the tile also will give you some rules of how you place the tile. So there's a lot of fun that comes in, but just the whole central market of tiles is really fascinating. Like we said, we heard that Meadow does something very similar, and I'm really excited to try that game because that has always been something that seems very interesting, very different, how they do that tile drafting, arrow, directional, I don't even know what you call it, but I want more.
Our number 3 is admittedly kind of a tough one to do, especially from like a component standpoint, and this is worker construction. This is where your workers in a worker placement game, or it could be another kind of game, but it's just games where you can change up what your workers are able to do. The best example of this is a really great game called Chimera Station, where you are aliens building out an alien base, but your aliens are these little plastic pieces that actually come apart because you can put different bits on the inside of them. You can put big old leaf arms, you can put big crab arms or tentacle arms or a big old brain, and then you put the pieces back together, and now that piece has that component on it and it can do different stuff. The tentacle arms means that when you go to a spot to get resources, you get to grab extra resources because you got these big old sticky tentacle arms. The crab arms can kind of go through and push other people out of spots, and basically you can go to spots that are already blocked because you can kind of just push people out of there. The brains give you extra points because you are big brains, you get points when you go to places. It's really, really fun, and then each of your workers can have 2 components on it. That can be 2 different components or 2 of the same components. So if you want double tentacle arms, you can be really good at getting resources. And I think it's so fascinating. And I think being able to upgrade your workers, or in this case, like physically construct your workers to make them different, is such an interesting mechanic because it makes you make such interesting choices. Even something like Viticulture World, which is the new cooperative version of Viticulture, you have your workers in that game, but your workers, you only have 4 of them, and 2 of them can only go in summer, and then 2 of them can only go in winter. And so, but throughout the game, you can pay to essentially upgrade your workers, take off that winter hat, and now they can go into either summer or winter. And that's a very simple version of kind of worker construction, but I think it makes it more interesting. And so I would really love to see worker construction in games. Again, from a component standpoint, it's kind of hard to do because how do you show that this worker now can do this thing? Do you just have to remember? Like in Chimera Station, you actually are taking these pieces apart and putting them together. It's a really fun gimmick that works really well, but not every game is gonna do that. That won't work in every single game. And so I'm not entirely sure how to go about it in a lot of different games, but I think it's a really interesting way to go about upgrading your actions, upgrading your workers. And I just think it makes such interesting decisions of, gosh, what upgrades do I want to put on that one? On this one, or this one, or this one, or these 2, or these 2 different ones. It's really, really fascinating. And I wish worker construction was in more games.
Something I want to see more of in games is Mancala-ness in games. Specifically, I want to see things where you do Mancala stuff, which is taking a bunch of things from one spot and kind of dropping off one item at a time until you end in the last spot. I want to see that in more games and not have it be built into a circle. So games like Trajan, which is famously used as a kind of Mancala rondel, you're going to pick up a bunch of your little colorful cylinders and drop them off, and then wherever you land, that's the action that you take. I think that creates a really interesting puzzle in itself, but something like for me that goes next level is 5 tribes, where you now have this kind of big square of tiles, and when you pick up a bunch of these colorful meeples, you can drop them off, but you can go one over here, then turn and go up, then go back, and you can traverse the kind of landscape in a non-linear, circuitous way. And I think that's really fun to add to the kind of spatial puzzle of it all. Like, okay, I want to get over here that's 3 spots away. I have, you know, 3 workers. If I go left, up, left, that'll get me there. Or, you know, however you drop stuff off and the rules that come there is really interesting. I love that in 5 tribes, the color of meeples that you ultimately pick up on that last spot will give you a different action. If you do the green workers, you'll get a bunch of cards from the market row. I think that's really interesting. And the fact that you're not just in a loop around and around, which is plenty interesting enough. Crusaders also does that. I just like that you can work it in any direction you want. And I would love to see more games do something like 5 tribes does. To my knowledge, I haven't seen something quite like that. I've seen other Mancala stuff in games, but that one just takes the spatialness into a whole different stratosphere, which I know for a lot of people causes a lot of AP, but I think it's so fun and interesting and creates so many interesting choices. So I want to see a lot more Mancala. I'd love to see what else we can do with it, but it's just something in general we don't see a ton of, so why not more?
And our number 1 is a mechanic that we've always said that we think is the most underused mechanic in board games, and that is I split, you choose, or I cut, you choose. That is gonna be where you're gonna have something, could be cards, could be tiles, could be resources, and you are going to be splitting them up into different groups, and then other people get to choose what group they want. There are a lot of really great games to do this. New York Slice is a game where you have a pizza, and when you are the slicer, you are going to get to divvy up that pizza, and you're going to have 1 portion per player, and then the next player in line gets to choose first. So in New York Slice, in a lot of these games, you're the one choosing last. Hence, I split, you choose, and then I'm going to get whatever's left over. And it makes such interesting decisions and such like this kind of like unspoken negotiation kind of where you're like, okay, I have to give you something that you want. Because for me to get this portion of this pizza, I need to make sure it's left behind for me. So I need to split up this pizza in a way where you're gonna take something that you want, you're gonna get something you want, but everyone's gonna leave this for me because I need this pepperoni, or something like that. Hanamakoji is a great I Split You Choose game, 2-player head-to-head game where you're constantly giving each other cards and splitting them, and the other person gets to choose them. And so you're like, okay, I think I can forego this particular majority because then it's gonna give me this majority. It creates such excruciating decisions, and I think it's so much fun. And the good thing about I Split You Choose games is it can be the entire game, or it can just be a portion of the game, but it isn't used that often in my opinion, and I really, really love it, and I really wish it was used more because I think it's the most underused mechanic in all of board games, and we've thought this for years. I Split You Choose is absolutely outstanding. It's our number 1, and dang it, more games need to use it.
So those are some things that we want to see more of in games. These things for us are always really interesting, and we always think like, why doesn't someone else do this? I want to see more of this.
Board games are all about borrowing. Someone else borrow these. It's great. Let us know down in the comments below what mechanisms, what things in games do you want to see more of? What is like, that's really, really cool. I wish someone else would do that as well because I think it's awesome. I think it's a cool way to kind of look at game mechanisms and stuff like that.
I agree. There's just so much stuff that goes into games, and we just want to see some more of certain elements of it. That's all. But we want to know what you think. Like, what are some elements of games that you think are really cool, unique, interesting, that you don't see of it often enough in games? Hit us in the comments below with those.
Right. Until next time, I'm Nick.
I'm Mike.
We're the Brothers Murph. We'll see you later, everybody.
Bye.